Did The Simpsons predict that the world's gonna end in 2 days? In 2005, The Simpsons released an episode called Thank God It's Doomsday, where Homer uses math to predict when the world's gonna end. And he comes to the conclusion it's gonna be 3:15 p.m. on May 18th. But there was never a year attached to that date. But some fans think they figured it out that it's this year. See, at the end of the episode, Doomsday can be watched on channel 23, which a lot of people think the show was subliminally suggesting that it was 2023. And this is coming after The Simpsons having other predictions that came true, like Trump being president, or even Disney buying Fox. Personally, this feels like a huge stretch, but what do you think's gonna happen in 2 days?
Seemingly innocent paintings with sinister backstories, Part 1. This disturbing self-portrait was painted by American serial killer and sex offender John Wayne Gacy. He was known as the Killer Clown and assaulted and murdered at least 33 young boys. After being diagnosed with Alzheimer's, artist William Utermohlen created a series of self-portraits to track the progression of his disease. And as you can see from the paintings, over time he began to forget what his own face looked like. This normal-looking painting of a bird in front of a sunset has a surprisingly dark artist behind it. If you look in the bottom right corner, you will see the signature of infamous cult leader and murderer Charles Manson, who was charged with the murders of 9 people in 1971.
This 13-year-old was murdered by accident when he tried to defend his mother from her boyfriend. In the early morning of March 24th, 39-year-old Houston Morris and his girlfriend, whose name has not been released, were arguing until things got physical. During the fight, Houston strangled her, hit her with a metal pipe and a bed frame. In an attempt to defend herself, she grabbed a knife from under the bed, but he managed to take it away from her. Houston then tried to stab her with a knife, but he missed, and instead he hit her 13-year-old son, Isaac Hoff, who was standing right behind her. Isaac at this point is bleeding out, so he calls police and he tells them that his mother is being attacked. When officers arrived, they found him lying in a pool of blood in the kitchen floor, and he later passed away in the hospital. Isaac's mother was found with multiple cuts, bruises, and bite marks, and her 1-year-old daughter was also found with blood all over her. Houston pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and he's now being held at the Renville County Jail.
Selfies that were taken seconds before death, Part 2. Businessman Gia Lajuna attempted to take a selfie with a 1.5-ton walrus at a zoo in China. After climbing into the enclosure, the walrus grabbed him from behind, dragged him underneath the water, drowning him in a matter of minutes. Chinese daredevil Wu Yongjing was an Instagram celebrity best known for taking selfies on top of skyscrapers. While trying to take a selfie on top of a skyscraper in 2017, he lost his grip, falling 62 stories to his death. In 2014, during Spain's annual Running of the Bulls event, 32-year-old David Gonzalez decided to stop and take a selfie in front of 2 bulls that were colliding behind him. All of a sudden, a third bull that he didn't see came from his side and gored him to death.
This is the Slender Man. He's a supernatural being who preys on children. The most famous story about the Slender Man concerns a girl named Lindsay. After waking up at midnight one evening, she went to make herself a cup of coffee. A cold chill went up her spine as she walked past her front door, but it was locked, exactly how she'd left it. Unable to resist, Lindsay took a look through the peephole. She saw nothing but darkness, which is to be expected in the middle of the night. That all changed when she blinked and saw a shape in the distance. It looked crudely human, but it had long limbs, with bulky joints branching off into several arms. It was dressed in a black suit, and its face, if you could even call it that, was completely featureless. Whilst running back to her room, she slipped on some coffee and watched in horror as the door's deadbolt unlocked. Nicole, Lindsay's sister, visited her soon after at the hospital. Lindsay had a bandage wrapped round her head, covering both her ears as well as her eyes. She also had several burns on her skin. As Nicole entered the room, she spotted the silhouette of a man in the window, but the room was on the 3rd floor.
A man with no arms was charged with stabbing a tourist using scissors with his feet. John Crenshaw was a well-known figure in South Beach, Florida. With no arms, he would impressively paint pictures with his feet and was once a viral sensation. He was known to be homeless and bragged about impregnating many women, including, he states, Gwen Stefani. In 2018, he was arrested for a shocking incident in Miami Beach. A tourist from Chicago, 22-year-old Cesar Coronado, claimed to have asked John for directions. John claimed that Cesar had punched him in the head. John jumped up, stabbing Cesar with scissors using his feet. Police discovered Cesar bleeding from his arms and he was rushed to hospital. John actually fled the area but was found shortly after close by. He was charged with aggravated battery and had a history of criminal offences. These included disorderly intoxication, vandalism, and battery on police officers.
So a woman in Utah who wrote a kid's book about grief after the death of her husband just got charged with poisoning him. Let's look into what happened. And if you're interested in stories like this, check out the podcast. This specific episode is about another poisoning. So last March, 33-year-old Corey Rutchins woke in the middle of the night to find that her husband was unresponsive. She called 911, and when the cops got there, she said that it was crazy that this had happened because he had been so fine that day. But she did mention that that night she had made him a Moscow Mule. And what we know now is that drink had 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in it. So she had spiked his drink that night, but investigators realized that this wasn't the first time that she had poisoned him. Her husband's family mentioned that several years ago, he had told them that he thought she was trying to poison him. Before being charged with his death, she actually wrote this children's book, which is about a young boy wondering if his late father is with him during big life events. And this actually comes after another high-profile case this year in which a Colorado man was poisoning his wife's protein drinks with cyanide. And before you say that people need to just learn how to get divorced, which I totally agree with, there's evidence that Eric was actually looking into getting a divorce and that Corey may have done this because she wanted to make sure that she was the sole beneficiary of his life insurance.
This is the moment right before a man accidentally killed a woman that he thought was his ex. 48-year-old Richard Montano is from Virginia. In late July 2022, his girlfriend Fatima Rojas broke up with him. She stated that their relationship was volatile and abusive. They'd been together 8 years and she'd had enough. She stated during their relationship that he hit and kicked her. On the 10th of August 2022, mother of 2, 40-year-old Sylvia Abakay was staying at Fatima's house. Unfortunately for Sylvia, she would be the horrific victim of mistaken identity. Richard knocked on the door, and as Sylvia answered, he launched a brutal attack. He hit and stabbed the woman, who sustained at least 10 blunt force injuries and 10 stab wounds. She managed to place a harrowing 911 call where she literally screamed for her life. Sadly, Sylvia would die from her injuries, and Richard tried to cover his tracks by setting fire to the house. He used Sylvia's own clothes to light the blaze and try and cover up the hideous murder scene. One attorney stated, "This case exhibited some of the most disturbing crime scenes I've encountered." Richard was found guilty of first-degree murder and arson. He's currently awaiting sentencing and will be sentenced in January.
Imagine losing not 1 but 2 of your babies after leaving them with your mother. This is what happened to Kayla Nix, who lost her 16-month-old son Ezra when she left him in the care of her 65-year-old mother Tracy. On December 2021, Tracy, who was Ezra's grandmother, was left to babysit, but she fell asleep and Ezra managed to get out of the house and drowned in a pond. During Ezra's passing, Kayla was pregnant with Uriel and she looked forward to having her daughter after tragically losing her son. Now, when Uriel was 7 months old, Kayla decided to give her mother a second chance and babysit her. On November 22nd, Tracy was babysitting Uriel and she took her out for lunch with her friends, but then when she came back home, she forgot Uriel in the car. The temperature was around the 90s and Uriel was left there for hours. It wasn't until one of her other grandchildren arrived that she remembered she left Uriel in the car, but at this point, it was too late. Uriel passed away 11 months after her 16-month-old brother. I can't even imagine how devastated Kayla must have been losing both of her babies, and it was all her mother's fault. Tracy was charged with aggravated manslaughter, and Kayla hopes that her babies get justice and that her mother is put in prison. She faces 12 to 30 years in prison, and apparently she's devastated about this whole situation, and she says that she simply just forgot. What do you guys think about this? Maybe she's developing some sort of dementia. I don't know.
They won't bother you, you know what I mean? No, John, what, John? No, dude.
Yes, you just heard Johnny Elbows, this guy who's a massive meme on the internet for his antics, say that an underage girl has a very cute butt and then he smacks his lips. So if you hadn't seen Johnny Elbows in the last year or so, you were probably living under a rock. Johnny Elbows, a Nebraska native, actually went viral on another person's account first. And noticing that people really enjoyed Johnny Elbows' personality and his sense of humor, Big Boy of Omaha, or The Underfaker, started filming more videos with him. This led Johnny Elbows to create his own account, Johnny Thorington, which I believe is his real name. On his account, Johnny started posting lots of content, and eventually he and Big Boy of Omaha gained over 100,000 followers on TikTok. So everybody just thought Johnny was a goofy, kind of strange dude. But they had no idea what he would say on that one live stream. So on May 18th, 2023, Johnny and Big Boy of Omaha went live on TikTok from a local playground. And during this live stream, a group of young kids started harassing Johnny. Now, the underfaker Big Boy of Omaha, he started backing Johnny up saying, "Hey man, just let it go, they're just kids." And that's when Johnny turned his head and made that extremely disgusting comment about a child. Now, since this was live, immediately hundreds, thousands of people started commenting in the live saying, "I cannot believe he just said that, that's disgusting." And shortly afterwards, screen recordings from that live went viral on TikTok. Now, this caused Johnny Elbows to vanish completely into thin air. Nobody knows exactly what he's doing nowadays. But it's deservedly so, because that's one of the most disgusting comments I've ever heard or seen here on this app. And I think if there's one person whose hard drive should be checked, it might be him.
Taken by a monster while playing out with friends, 5-year-old April Jones was last seen climbing into a grey 4x4. She was never seen again. April was born on April 4th, 2007 in Wales. She was a loving, cheeky little girl who liked swimming and riding her bike. She also suffered from cerebral palsy but didn't let it hold her back. On October 1st, 2012, when she was just 5 years old, she invited a friend round after school to watch films. They then went outside to play on their bikes. It was already 7 p.m, so April's mum Coral only allowed her 20 minutes before she went out into the street looking for her. Only April was nowhere to be seen. After 10 minutes of frantically searching for her daughter, Coral called the police, and when they spoke to April's friend, she said that she'd seen April talking to a man and she'd then climbed into his van with him. April's disappearance was immediately escalated to a critical incident and a huge search began. April's friend had also given a description of the man that she'd seen April with, and a man matching that description was questioned by police. That man was 46-year-old Mark Bridger. They looked into Mark's background and found that he was a divorced father of 6 with a string of previous offences, including assault. His appearance matched the description that April's friend had given, and he also had a vehicle registered to him, which was a left-hand drive Land Rover Discovery, which also matched the description of the car that April had got into. On October 2nd, the day after April disappeared, police were dispatched to Mark's home, and as they entered, they called April's name, hoping to find her alive. The house was unusually hot inside, the fire was still warm, and there was a strong smell of cleaning products. 30 minutes later, Mark was spotted by police and they stopped him. The first thing he said was, "I know what this is about," to which the officer replied, "Where is she?" Mark told police that he'd been drunk and he'd hit April with his car. This obviously contradicts the witness statement saying that she saw April get into the car with Mark alive. He said that he'd tried to revive April but couldn't remember what happened after that and couldn't recall what he'd done with April's body. A search of Mark's vehicle, clothes and home began, and what police found just confirmed everybody's worst fears. April had been murdered. Her DNA was found on Mark's clothing, including the crotch part of his trousers, and blood splatter was found, matching April's DNA, throughout the house and in his vehicle. And in the fireplace in Mark's house, which was still warm, they found bone fragments, which were thought to be from April's skull. They also searched his laptop, and he had searches for things like naked 10-year-old girls, and he also had photos saved from Facebook of local girls, including April and her sisters. Mark was sentenced in 2013 to life without parole, and still to this day, April's body has not been found.
This is the worst pedophile in Australian history, and it was just announced that this guy has over 1,600 charges against him. So for a while in Australia, this guy's identity wasn't being released. That is, until just a day or so ago. Well, meet Ashley Paul Griffith. He's 45 years old and he's from Queensland, Australia. So between 2007 and 2022, Ashley abused 91 girls. And it took authorities 8 years to track this guy down because he wasn't just abusing these children, he was filming this and posting it on the internet. So Ashley was a childcare worker, which meant he always found himself at daycare centers, which is where he primarily accessed his victims. In one of the more disturbing details from this case, Ashley abused reportedly 2 different girls at the same daycare center 24 times each. It was also stated that he abused 7 different children in 1 month. So at the time of Ashley's arrest, he was actually working as the director of a childcare center in Brisbane, Australia. I'm going to read you this little excerpt from his staff profile on the Child Care Center's website. He said, "I love engaging children in meaningful experiences that inspire their play and learning. Young children are natural inquirers, exploring the world through their senses, seeking answers and building theories." So Ashley wanted the world to see him as this caring adult, when in reality, he was the worst predator in Australian history, at least according to the news and authorities. So, like I said, all this was brought about because he was posting all of these abuses on the dark web, selling it to other pedophiles. He was the head of a big network. And in a disturbing twist, his own sister, after his arrest, has been trying to resell the cameras that he used to videotape these abuses. Here's what she wrote on Facebook Marketplace. She said, "I'm selling on behalf of my brother who's been recently incapacitated and is unable to do it on his own. I may not be able to answer too many questions, sorry." I feel like these cameras should not only be in the possession of authorities, but they should also be destroyed. No one should ever be using these cameras again. So yeah, I'm excited to see this guy go away for life. Truly one of the sickest people I've ever read about. And it's shocking to see people like this guy who like to act like they're caring towards children. They take these positions where they're working closely with children and they use that to get access to kids. I mean, it's just despicable. You never really know who you're trusting your kids with when you're bringing them to a daycare center.
At just 16 years old, Becky Watts fought for her life while her stepbrother and his girlfriend viciously attacked her, living out a fantasy that they'd sickeningly conjured up together. Becky lived in Bristol with her dad Darren and his wife Angie. She suffered from mental health problems and anorexia. She'd been seen by a number of professionals over the years, and it was noted that her behaviour was worse when she'd been in the presence of her stepbrother Nathan, who often teased her about her weight. Becky had told a family support worker that she was scared of a lot of things, but instead of listening to her, she was described in this assessment as controlling and lacking aspiration. She was treated as problematic rather than a troubled teenager with a difficult past. Nathan lived nearby with his girlfriend Shauna, and sickeningly, they had a shared desire to kidnap a petite teenage girl. They both seemed to have an obsession for young girls, and when the couple met, Nathan was 22 and Shauna was just 15. At 22 and 29, they lived in a filthy house and spent most of the time in their bedroom. They even kept a kettle and a toaster in there, so they didn't need to leave the room to eat or drink. Nathan was viewing pornography every day, and it usually included young girls or women dressed up like schoolgirls. The couple often talked about kidnapping someone, and Nathan had actually gone as far as telling Becky how he'd kill her, saying that he'd use a sledgehammer. She expressed to a family support worker that she was actually scared of Nathan, but it was never investigated. On February 19, 2015, Nathan and Shauna headed over to Becky's house. They knew she was alone, and they took with them handcuffs, a knife and 2 tasers. Becky was suffocated and stabbed in the abdomen 15 times. She'd obviously fought for her life as she had defensive wounds to her hands and arms. She was then put into a suitcase and placed in the boot of Nathan's car. They then actually stayed at the house for around 6 hours, with other family members arriving home. They then drove to their own house and put Becky in the bath, where they used a circular saw to cut her body into 8 pieces. They then placed the body parts in boxes and bags of salt. Nathan then actually paid a couple of friends to keep the body for him in their shed. Becky was reported missing the next day, and 2 weeks later her remains were found in the shed of Nathan's friends Jadine and Carl. 2 days after Becky's body was found, Nathan was arrested, and just 3 months later, Shauna was also arrested. Nathan tried to plead guilty to manslaughter, saying that he hadn't meant to kill Becky, he just meant to kidnap her, but that it went wrong and she died. And Shauna said that she hadn't taken part in the actual murder, and Nathan backed up these claims. Shauna was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 17 years. And Nathan was found guilty of Becky's murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 33 years. Jadine and Carl were both found guilty of assisting an offender and sentenced to 2 years.
This is the woman people are calling the real-life Gone Girl. She faked her own horrific abduction and wasted 5 years of police time. You're not going to want to miss this one. It is absolutely insane. This all begins November 2nd of 2016. Keith Papini returned home from work at around 5 p.m. He was expecting to come home to his 34-year-old wife, Sherry Papini, and his 2 kids, but they weren't home. Keith called the daycare where his kids were staying and asked when Sherry came to pick up the kids. The daycare then told him that she never came, so the kids were okay. He immediately finds this very strange, calls the police, and reports her missing. This was taken very seriously by the police. She seemed to have vanished out of thin air. It wasn't long before the news was reporting on it, and her missing posters were all over California. Because there were no leads, fingers pointed at Keith, the husband. Everyone thought it was Keith. He even took a polygraph test and passed it, but people still thought it was him. That's until 22 days later, when Sherry returned. 150 miles away from where she was last seen, a driver finds her walking on the side of the road in chains. This driver called the police and she was brought in. She was covered in bruises. She had lost weight and her back had been branded. Understandably, police were shocked. When asked what happened, she claimed that 2 Hispanic women abducted her. She claimed that they were going to sell her to a man and that's why she was branded. Police were taking this very seriously. Sherry explained in detail the abuse that she went through and the room she was in. She also described the women enough for them to create a sketch of people who did not exist, because it was all a lie. Police found it very strange that these abductors just let her go, but this isn't to say that they didn't believe her. They definitely did, and they took it very seriously. They were determined to find out who did this to this poor mother of 2. The government helped pay for therapy for her PTSD and anxiety after this event. During this time, police were testing her clothes and they finally found DNA. This DNA belonged to a man, not a woman. And she apparently encountered no men during this kidnapping. They put it through the police database and nothing came up. That's until 2020 when they decided to put it through a genealogy database, hoping that someone related to the person with this DNA went on like Ancestry or anything like that. With this, they were able to find the exact person with that DNA. And this person was Sherry's ex-boyfriend. The story only gets crazier from here, so come back for part 2. It'll be up the moment I'm done filming.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This guy is one of the most awful serial killers there has ever been, and I feel like he's never talked about. In my opinion, this guy's worse than Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer. Hi Meg, I talk about true crime. Let's get into the story of the Butcher, the worst serial killer Canada has ever seen. Robert Pickton was born October 24th, 1949, in British Columbia, Canada. Robert had quite a bad upbringing. His dad was very abusive. He actually grew up on a pig farm. From a really young age, him and his brother had to work countless hours on this pig farm, and then they were forced to go straight to school without taking a shower or anything. Because he was showing up to school unwashed, Robert started getting bullied, and they gave him the nickname Stinky Piggy. As Robert grew older, he was said to be very quiet, but he apparently sometimes had these weird bursts of bizarre behavior. These bursts would come out of nowhere and he would just start acting really strange. In 1996, Robert's brother opened up a kind of charity thing. The charity was started to try to make more money for their pig farm. It was called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. And what they would do is they would hold huge parties and raves to try and raise money. And I'm not joking when I say huge parties and raves. 17,000 people were said to have shown up at one point. 17,000 people at once. Sex workers and biker gangs would join these parties as well, but for Robert, it all started going downhill in 1997, when he attempted to murder a girl. I don't usually do this in these videos, but a lot of you ask what blush I use, and this is the blush I use. It's usually £10 on the TikTok shop, but it's on for $5 right now. So if you click right here, you can get it. I just ordered kind of a peachy version of this. I'm not being paid to talk about this. I just saw they were on offer and you guys ask about these all the time. So get your hands on them for cheap while you can. So Robert attempts to murder a woman for the first time that we know of. According to her statement, he attempted to handcuff her and then he started stabbing her multiple times before she managed to get away. This should have been the thing that got him on police radar, but he was able to get the charges dropped because the woman he attacked was on a lot of drugs at the time, and Robert used that to come up with a story. He told police, like, she was hitchhiking, I was just trying to help her, and she attacked me. And they believed him because she was on drugs. And unfortunately, for the next 60 women he would kill, he was let go. And he was able to come up with a strategy that wouldn't get him caught next time. He developed a plan and started killing a bunch of women. And Robert was really, really good at staying under the radar. Now, what did he do exactly? Let me tell you. Because it's disturbing. First of all, he always went for hitchhikers, addicts, or prostitutes. And what he would do is he would promise them money, drugs, accommodation, anything to get them back to his farm. Once he got them back, he would then shoot or strangle them to death. And this next part is why he was given the name the Butcher. He would take the victims' bodies, chop them up, and feed them to his pigs. Now, if you're not aware of this already, pigs will literally eat anything. Everything. So the evidence was just, bye. They were getting rid of the evidence for him. All of a sudden, there is an increase in missing women in the area. But sadly, because he only went after sex workers or addicts or hitchhikers, no one cared. And this always makes me so mad with cases like these. Like, they're still human beings, but no bodies were showing up, so there was no crime, no body, no crime. But as the numbers started rising, people were kind of getting a bit worried. A group of people that weren't the police actually got a list together of all of the names of these young women who were missing. They brought that to the police and were like, do you see now? And that's when the investigation actually began into finding out what happened to these girls. And all of these girls had one person in common: Robert Pickton. He was the only person whose name continuously came up when they were looking for these girls. Police needed a way to get onto the farm with a warrant without him knowing about it and hiding all the evidence first. And so they heard that he had possession of an illegal firearm. And so they used that as the cover-up to get onto his property. On the property, they found multiple items that belonged to these missing women, along with some blood-stained clothing and tiny bone fragments. Now, things aren't looking too good for Robert, but because the pigs had eaten all the evidence, basically all of it, they were only able to charge him with the murder of 6 women. And so he got 6 counts of murder. When he got arrested, he actually said that he killed 49 women and that he was sad that he didn't get to round up to 50. What the hell, Robert? What does he want the police officer to say, like, oh, I feel so bad for you? No! He was arrested in 2002, and this trial was huge. Of course, he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. But guys, that's not the worst part of this story, because I'm getting to that now. One element of the story that I kept out until now is that Robert sold the meat of his pigs to people who lived around the area. These pigs, who ate the remains of 60 women, were sold to his neighbors. When I say neighbors, I just mean people who live in the area. So like secondhand cannibalism. I could never eat pig again if that was me. So yeah, they were pretty disturbed and freaked out by this information, which is totally understandable and just totally disgusting. After a huge search of his property, police now believe that the number of women Robert killed was in the 60s. 60 women. 60 mother, daughters, wives. It's insane. It really annoys me with cases like these. I know it was like in 2002 and things have changed, but have they? I find that a lot of cases like these that I cover always start with, oh, all these women were going missing, but they were sex workers, but they were drug addicts, who cares? And it's like, it's insane to me that like they're not seen as equals to any other woman walking on the street, but whatever. Hopefully that changes. And for those wondering, I have actually covered this story before, but the quality of the video was so bad that I couldn't keep it up anymore. Like, it really bothered me to watch back, so I thought I would remake it in a higher quality way. I hope you guys enjoyed it regardless, and have a wonderful day. My heart goes out to every single one of the victims, their families, and people who cared about them. And I hope Robert rots in jail. Anyways, this is not a good representation of Canadians. We're actually really nice people. I'll see you all in the next video. Love you guys. Bye.